Richard, amazing to be here in the heart of cold country in Poland.
Yes,
at
indeed.
the latest round of climate negotiations,
Yeah.
the so-called COP24.
Yeah.
You've just written a book
Yeah.
about climate denial. How relevant is that now? I mean, the science is so clear. I mean, an overwhelming majority of scientists. I mean, surely, is that book needed in the context of these negotiations?
Well, I think from a scientific and sort of evidence-based point of view, it isn't really needed because it's all out there. But I think the fact is that forces of contrarianism, as I would call them, are still very much alive, as we're seeing here in Katowice. We've got, the coal industry is not only, promoting coal as a fuel, they're actually selling coal jewellery.
Coal jewellery?
Yeah, exactly. I'm
Wow.
not going to buy any for anyone for Christmas, but that is on sale right here in Katowice. Yeah.
Oh, you heard it here first. This is where to get the latest must-have item. But yes, so we've had this amazing, not amazing, this quite scary report from the IPCC, the sort of international body of climate scientists, which makes two things very clear. Every half a degree really matters. So there is a huge impact if we go from 1.5 to 2 degrees.
Yeah.
And we've got a very short window, 12 years, to halve emissions.
Yeah.
Yet that report, which this body asked for several years ago, 3 years ago, I think,
At the Paris summit, yeah.
at the Paris summit, they've not actually welcomed it, have they?
No, they haven't. They got stuck with a small number of governments, the US, Kuwait, Saudi, and Russia declining to do that. So as we speak right now in the middle of the conference, it's gone to the main body. I guess by the time people are watching this, there may have been resolution on that. It's an interesting ploy because, of course, those governments have already accepted the report. They are members of the Intergovernmental Panel. The clue's in the name, Intergovernmental Panel. They endorsed the report back in October, and now they're declining to welcome it. So one wonders really what the beef is.
So, in many ways, we thought we had defeated the deniers. I don't want to call them skeptics, as you point out. They're not skeptical; they're actually deniers. But are they still alive and well and exerting influence?
Well, I call them contrarians in the book because they do come in many different shapes and sizes. And for example, if you think of someone like Nigel Lawson, he doesn't deny that climate change is happening or that there's a human cause involved. He sort of questions how serious it will be and what the right policy response is and so on and so forth. One of the points of the book, and I'll just give a quick plug if I may, Denied, the rise and fall of climate contrarianism, thank you, might do another one later. The point of the book is that really on all the points of evidence they've lost. I go into 8 canonical arguments, as I call them. The climate isn't changing, it's changing but it's not man-made, it's changing but it won't be that bad, we should just adapt, climate science is bent, we can't afford the clean energy transition, renewable energy means the lights will go out and no one else is going to do anything.
So you, in the book, you run through each of the common myths, if you like, and address them one by one.
I do, and I think it's important to get this in the round because the contrarian movement, I think it's fair enough to call it, or at least a school of thought, isn't only about climate science, it's also about the clean energy transition, scepticism about whether that can work. And as we know, prices have come down massively. Denmark, for example, is getting nearly half of its electricity from renewables. So clearly it does work, and that whole myth about the lights going out is just proven to be rubbish. The argument about we can't afford a clean energy transition similarly is just gone. The same bodies of people have all those arguments in their quiver, which is why I sort of treat all of them, the ones that are to do with climate science and the ones that are to do with the sort of clean energy transition and geopolitics, I sort of treat them all together. But yes, essentially, on virtually all of them, the contrarians have lost.
So you spent at least 10 years in the media yourself
as the BBC,
as the environment correspondent. So maybe, there's no better person to ask than you. To what extent have the media been complicit in climate denialism? This whole idea of false equivalence, for example.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I showed a draft of the book to someone who works in climate change but has never lived or worked in the UK. And her comment overall was the level of media collusion is extraordinary. And collusion's a strong word, but I think if you read the book, you'll see that perhaps it is justified. We saw, for example, in 2009, when a book was published by one of the main contrarians, Christopher Booker, journalist and author, it was reviewed by 3 of the UK's absolutely top-tier newspaper columnists, and 3 media organisations sort of offered it at a discount price through their own book services, which is amazing for any book on a sort of what you might call fairly nerdy and arcane subject such as climate change. We see that it's dwindling now, and this is one of the points of the book, is that they are losing. But you have seen, over the last years, most of the columnists who talk about climate change have been from the contrarian camp. And you'll still see the Spectator magazine, for example, running articles that just dismiss climate change. For example, on the IPCC report that you mentioned earlier, their take was, oh, well, now they're saying we've got 12 years to save the planet, but 9 years ago they said we've got 6 months to save the planet, and blah, 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 blah. Neglecting that what the IPCC had actually said, as you mentioned, is not 12 years to save the planet, it's 12 years to halve emissions, which is a very, very specific thing.
Well, where does this come from in the media? I mean, and as a journalist, explain to me, if you've got the vast majority of scientific opinion saying one thing, why is there this need to have someone counter that? I mean, it's if you were doing a program about gravity, I mean, would you feel the need to have someone dispute the theory of gravity? I mean, it's difficult to understand, so explain that to me.
So I think we've got to go back to 2008 and 2009, particularly 2009 when the so-called ClimateGate affair unravelled. So at that time,
that was this disclosure of emails from climate scientists.
Yeah, that's right. They were basically stolen from a computer server at the University of East Anglia, and a tiny selection of them was sort of offered to the media with commentary saying that they proved climate science were colluding, etc., etc. So I think what happened at that point was there had been a small coterie of individuals and organisations that had been trying to tell editors and so on that this was all a crock. And what ClimateGate seemed to do was to prove them right. And then, of course, we had the Copenhagen summit shortly afterwards, which was not a triumph, let's be honest, for geopolitics and the New World Order. So I think what happened was, to a number of editors, it seemed that the contrarians were actually right. Now, any newspaper editor is going to spend a tiny proportion of their time thinking about climate change and clean energy. They have to deal with all kinds of other issues. And the problem was that I think there was no one within the earshot of editors who could then relay all of the evidence coming in that's showing that climate scientists were not bent. Price of renewable energy was falling. The lights were not going.
Carbon tracker work shows it's it's
absolutely,
falling. Yes.
Absolutely. And so there was no one to be, if we want to put it in these terms, sceptical about the skeptics, which is why their presence, I think, persisted in the media for so long.
So, I mean, one of the allegations I've heard from climate deniers is that many climate scientists are in it for the money, which is ludicrous at best. But is there perhaps another side to this coin? I mean, where do these people get funded? Because they need funding, they need money to operate. Where does that come from?
So I think in the US, obviously climate denial, and I think it is reasonable to call it denial in the US, a lot of it has been funded, and that's the main. In the UK, I don't think it's the same thing. I call them conviction contrarians in the book, because it seems to me that there is some funding, but it's not the biggest thing. The biggest seems to me a political philosophy, a view of how the world is. So some obviously have made money from books, from lecture tours, that sort of thing, but in the main, they tend to be wealthy individuals anyway. Lord Ridley, the clues in the title.
In the title, yes. Okay.
Lord Lawson, etc. James Dellingpole, former Etonian. These people are not short of a bob or two already. So I don't think they're in it for the money.
So it comes from a sort of an ideological conviction.
I think in part, it's a very interesting thing that I discovered. I had to read some of the books that Lawson and Ridley and so on had written. And the name of Hayek, the economist, crops up in both Lawson and Ridley's books. In fact, Lawson quotes a bit. And I think there's a bit of political and economic philosophy involved here. In that the point that they both make, the point they cite Hayek as making, is basically a non-interventionist philosophy, that you can't plan economies, things evolve organically and things adapt. And the extension to me seems to be that you shouldn't try and do this in the climate change space, because things will evolve organically, and that's the best way for things to evolve.
Fossil fuels was came into being as an industry through government support. I mean,
Right.
how do they rationalise fossil fuel subsidies, for example? But anyway,
I think by the simple expedient of ignoring them. But I think the wider point is that we have already interfered with the climate system. So it's not like it's this wonderful self-regulating thing that's in a healthy state and we shouldn't interfere with it. We already have. And the question is, do we interfere again to make up for the interference that we've already visited on it?
so I mean, what sort of conclusions do you draw? I mean, is this now defeated, if that's too strong a term, or is there still work to do to push back on this form of contrarianism and denial?
So I think intellectually they are defeated. I mean, of those 8 sort of canonical arguments that I run through, I think there are 2 where there's still some justification. Some bits of the sort of transition to a net zero economy look more expensive than not transitioning. I mean, not on the energy side, but if you look at industrial prices and so on and so forth. And of course, we don't know whether governments actually will follow through on the pledges that they made at the Paris conference. We don't know whether they will be serious enough about limiting climate change to 2 or 1.5. But on the other arguments, they've undeniably intellectually lost. But that doesn't mean they've lost in the real world, because as we see here in Poland, as we see in Australia, as we see in the US, there are big vested interests. Trump cannot revive coal. Well, he probably can't revive it anyway, but he certainly can't revive it without injections of public cash. And that may happen. We're seeing in Australia the government going to all kinds of lengths to get the Adani mine, which no one wants apart from the Adani company and the Australian government. So that sort of stuff is still there. There's incumbency, there's lobbying. Let's be honest, there's corruption in certain places, and you've got countries such as Saudi Arabia that, to a large extent, economically are the oil industry.
And this gives them an intellectual fig leaf, if you like.
Contrarianism has given them an intellectual fig leaf. I think it's a really good way of describing it.
I mean, there's a fascinating bit in the book where you describe where you were, you ended up on an email trail where they were planning the organisation of a think tank, a sort of contrarian organisation.
That's right.
Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, we go back to about 2007. I'd newly gone from BBC World Service Radio to the BBC website, and I thought I'd do a series of articles on climate scepticism. So I was obviously in dialogue with a few, and I ended up, as you said, on this sort of chain of emails. I had about 70 people in it, and that was the discussion, was we need a new kind of campaign group, lobby group, that's basically going to be much more effective in fighting the political fight. There were already a number of such groups in existence, but clearly they weren't working, because we'd had the Stern Review, we'd had the 2007 IPCC report, we'd had governments leading up to Copenhagen, so something new was needed. And after a while, I suppose what happened was that someone realised that it wasn't a good idea to have a journalist on this email group, and I was quietly sort of cut off. But it was a very interesting insight, because within 2 years we had the launch of the Global Warming Policy Foundation, which was exactly this sort of group. Now, whether those things were linked, I've no idea, but we can at least see that there was discussion of the need.
What
to have
came out of
like
it
this.
was the GWPF, I guess, or maybe.
Maybe, I mean, that link's not been proven, but it's certainly indicative.
So, well, how can people get hold of the book? Because it is a great book to read.
Thank you.
How can people get hold of it?
So basically, here's first of all, have a quick look at the title, Denied, The Rise and Fall of Climate Contrarianism. The easiest way is probably through Amazon. If you just search on the book section of Amazon, you can either get a print copy, which was printed and on demand and shipped out to you, so that no trees die unnecessarily, or you can get the Kindle download, or you can go to the publisher's website, which is The Real Press. You'll find that too.
And as a final comment, I mean, is there anything we now need to do? What would you recommend to people watching this video, other than read your book?
Yeah, of course, yes. Well, I think if you still see this stuff in the media, or you still hear it from politicians, because there are still some MPs who truly believe that wind power is expensive and unpopular in the UK, which is bizarre, because it's neither. But anyway,
it's cheaper.
So and devastatingly popular. So I think the thing is, if you hear that sort of stuff, then question it. Write to the MP, write to the newspaper, whatever it is. All the evidence is in the book that you will need to make that case. Although, of course, it keeps being updated. I'd say that's it, because although they are dying very much, it's certainly in the UK as a force in politics and the media, they haven't quite gone, and what happens in the UK does influence other countries as well.
No, it does.
The British media has an immense reach.
Well, it's the beginning of the daily news cycle in many ways.
Yes, it is, of course,
Richard, thank you. Well, it's
Thank
been
you.
great to do it here in Katowice at the flying saucer-shaped building that we're in, which is something to behold. You heard Richard's recommendations. Thank you. Please get involved in the conversation. Please comment. You're part of the Green and Tonic community. And of course, remember to subscribe to the channel. Thank you.